It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome to the June program. You'll probably notice somebody's missing, and that is Kate. She's very, very busy at the moment and couldn't join me to do the links. So sadly, I'm all on my own, but she'll be back in July. That's a promise. Welcome to the June program. Welcome, welcome. News. Lisa Minogue-White is joining us as our roving, avid, engaged reporter on books and authors. So today she's talking to someone very special, Michelle Parry-Slater, but she'll be meeting a whole range of L&D authors over the coming months. So welcome her. Also on the show today, we have Yasmin Alani. Yasmin is really award-winning. She's won 2 Learning Awards this year, and she also won the Cultural Pioneers Award by Training Zone. Fantastic achievement. And she's going to be talking about how you change culture in organizations. And joining her will be Laurie Niels-Hoffman. Laurie's talking about a new book, which is about EdTech know-how. It's called The 7 Levers because there are 7 areas that she explores in great detail. Absolutely excellent book. And it's just out, so you can buy it and be one of the first to buy it. And Michelle Parry-Slater discusses her latest book's evolution, along with Lisa Minogue-White. And finally, Rob Clark, our friend Rob Clark on Learning News, talks to John Taylor about the conference and to 2 of its stars. First one, David Kelly. Second, Danny Johnson. And he discusses their keynotes. So, go on, enjoy the show. It's not often we get to talk to triple award winners on Learning Now TV, but today I'm delighted to say we have Yasmin Alani from MediaZoo. Yasmin is the director of transformation at MediaZoo and is a recent double award winner at the Learning Awards and a Cultural Pioneer Gold Award winner. And that's what I want to focus on in this interview. So Yasmin, first of all, welcome to Learning Now TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. It's great to talk to you. So first of all, what did you have to do to win the Cultural Pioneers Award? And why do you think that's a good award to win?
I think it's really important actually to start with what makes the Culture Pioneers Award so special. And in my experience, what makes it stand out from other awards is it doesn't just look at the outcomes. It doesn't just focus on the results, which of course are important, but it recognizes the journey. It recognizes the journey and it recognizes the holistic amount of effort that takes to get to that result. And I think that's a really powerful shift in what they're trying to do rather than kind of some of the other awards. And, you know, when we're talking specifically about cultural work, there is this pressure to show up, you know, and have neat results and, you know, look how much engagement went up, or here is our kind of new values. But anyone that is passionate about culture, or someone like me that works in the cultural space, we know that change is really messy, and cultural change it's messy, it's emotional, it's unpredictable, because it's about people, right?
So how does that help you in your work? How does it slot in with the rest of your work as Director of Transformation? And what is, by the way, Director of Transformation? Who are you transforming?
So that's a really good place to start. I work in the transformation space, but I think it's really easy to assume with that title, this means big strategic shifts and big strategic shifts, new systems, new structures, bringing in process, bringing in new tech. Anyone that knows me knows that the thought of me bringing in a new tech process is laughable, because what I really focus on is the cultural piece. And for me, culture is about people. So how does this award slot into the rest of my work? To be honest, it's a reflection of what I talk about all the time. Culture is what I've been talking about. I think before I even started a career, I was always so passionate about people. It's the golden thread that kind of runs through my life. So what I do in my role and my work is I really support businesses to focus on the people side of transformation. Because when I'm brought into organizations, transformation is often underway, and I'll see these huge detailed strategies of process and structure and systems. And then when I ask the simple question of, well, how are your people being brought into this? How are you communicating with them? What's your people strategy that supports the transformation side? And there's either a sort of silence or, oh, we've sent this email out, we've got this training course in place, but that doesn't speak to what human beings are about and what motivates them and, how we kind of go through change. So what I support is what I describe as always the cultural side to transformation, because culture shift is about behavioral shift. And if you don't shift behaviors, your transformation isn't going anywhere.
It's absolutely true. I despair when I get to organizations. They show me the transformation model. And you say, well, where is the buy-in here? The model itself does nothing. And if you really want to cause problems for yourself and build massive resistance, just don't tell anyone anything, or say, we'll let you know at some stage what you have to do here, and then we'll let you know what you have to. So it's all about doing stuff to people. You do the opposite. You work with people to help them do it for themselves, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's 100% true. It's really nice to talk to someone that also gets it, because often you find yourself talking and you think, this can't be that complicated to understand. Why are people not doing it? But I don't know whether it's a kind of a fear from organizations that that's going to slow down the process or take too much time. Is it because there's a financial element, that obviously if you're going to do that as well, there needs to be more investment. But, the way that I describe it is, if you're not helping people change and if you're not allowing people to feel like change is happening alongside them and part of them and it's happening to them, you will have to do it twice, because there is no change that is possible without the people behind it going, through that change. We're obviously, the big topic at the moment is AI adoption and AI transformation. And yes, of course, there is a technical piece to that, but ultimately it's about a behavioral shift. It's a cultural shift. And if we're not allowing people to feel confident and motivated and bought in to a really new thing for them, your company will never adopt AI. So it's helping people understand that even AI transformation is culture transformation.
I was going to ask you, so that you would be very comfortable going into an organization that is in the process of incorporating, building in AI into the workflow, and say, yes, I will help you with that. My focus will be on the people part of that. Yeah, because the technology, in some ways, the technology is the small bit. It's the big bit. It's the iceberg. It's the people that are the real winners and also potentially the real losers. And you focus on building winners, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about the stage that I'm kind of often brought in. Unfortunately, what I would love is that I get to be brought in way ahead of when this transformation is happening and be a consultative partner and, really helping businesses and organizations to buy into the people side of what they're about to do. But it is often an afterthought when things aren't maybe going as they planned. The whole strategy that was mapped out somehow isn't going according to plan. And what is difficult about that space is people are already turned off to the change. Then you're not coming at it from a neutral position. You're coming at it from negative, from minus. So you have to do so much more work to even get them back to neutral and get them to trust in you and what you're trying to do. It would be so much easier if alongside all of the technical and the process transformation, there was always the people strategy of transformation alongside.
I couldn't beat you, Ruth. You build up resistance almost before you start. I remember one company, the change team, had their own glass office, but they put paper on the inside of the glass so you couldn't see inside. It was like a kind of magic place that you could peer in and see all these flip charts with writing all over them, but you never knew what was going on. And they only ever came out of that room when they presented a fully fledged plan, say, you will do this, you will do that, and we'll do it by then. And already before they'd open their mouths, you had half the organization, more, maybe 3/4 of the organization saying, oh yeah, we'll see about that. And you end up with failed change initiatives. Don't take people into account. So tell me, I'm saying, oh, this is interesting, Yasmin. I'd like you to come into my organization. Where do you start? What do you do to bring people on board and get in some ways, what you're doing is getting the right climate. So it's not just about bringing people, it's bringing the executive on board, it's bringing the CEO on board. Getting the organization line. What do you do? Just give me some examples of how you would build that kind of alignment, because I think that's very interesting and people like to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Media Zoo, we look at ourselves as engagement experts. And I think that's a really good place to start, because engagement, for anyone that's interested in this space or even has read the Gallup's kind of future state of the workplace report, knows that engagement is at, kind of really critical point, right? We're sort of 21% engaged globally. We're 10% engaged in the UK. So we are way more behind than others. So what I will always come in and do is look at your audiences. So try and understand who are the people that this is actually going to land with, right? Leadership are its own kind of sector as well. I think we need to do a lot of work with leadership to help them feel that they have the skill sets to drive change and they are enabled and equipped to kind of communicate and help people align to that purpose. But there are so many things that we do through our deep dive discovery process where possible. And some businesses often are a bit resistant to this, and maybe we'll come on to this in a little while, but allowing me to talk to the people that are going to be going through it. I mean, it sounds the most basic thing, but let's talk to the people that are going to go through this change. Let's talk to people who have, we are in a space now where businesses have had change upon change upon change. There's not kind of one singular change. So each organization, it's going to have its own environment about how change is landing. They're going to have their own culture about how change is built. So the more discovery and insight and understanding I can have about what has come before, how that has landed, how are people feeling, what is the temperature, that is going to stand people in really good stead. And
you're absolutely right. I call that field work, Yasmin. You've got to do your field work. You don't take what someone tells you, oh, the staff all really love this, or, oh, they're really terrible, oh, I hate it. You've got to really lash them to get anything done. You go and do your field work so that when you talk about what you're going to do, it's done with the basis of knowledge, kind of deep knowledge. And sometimes you're the first person to explore the issues with the staff. You should be the last person, but you're actually the first. And that gives you an edge because you know what people want and what they will tolerate and what they won't, and the best way to work with them. So that's stage one. What's the next stage?
Yeah. So stage one is your deep dive discovery, right? Yeah. And then that allows us to kind of map. Most transformational work for us will be mapped to the ADKAR kind of process. And for people that aren't familiar with that, it's a very well-researched and well-used kind of change arc, if you like. I like to think of it as an arc. So awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And what I always say is I think what businesses and organizations do quite commonly, they do the awareness bit and maybe they do the knowledge bit. So we've all been privy to kind of that email that kind of goes out and they're like, by the way, this is happening. Maybe there'll be a training course, but what are we doing to build that desire? And, some of us might call that motivation, in people. So, the next stage is really doing kind of that deep work around, well, what are the things that are going to motivate people? And every organization will be different, right? And then I think, and maybe this is jumping to the end of it, but what I rarely see is the reinforcement bit, because we all know that even with the best one in the world, something that we learn, we might not adopt kind of fully. It might not be embedded fully. So it's working with organizations across all points of the arc of ADKAR to understand how we can have a human-centric approach to each of these
Is it
pillars.
rather like a flower bed, that you've got to know what soil you've got. Then you've got to tend the soil and prepare it. Then you've got to know what you plant. Then you've got to tend that and look after it. And if you cut any of those corners, you end up with failure. You end up with wilting plants rather than strong, robust plants. And you're trying to build strong, robust people, aren't you? You're trying to build people who are confidently coping with change.
I love that analogy because I am desperately trying to build my green thumb in my new house, and have been spending quite a few weeks doing the gardening. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I often talk about culture being the main course. It's not a side dish, and it's not optional, and I think when corners are cut and when we have conversations about budget and time, and oftentimes someone will have been helicoptered in to get this thing done, and they're just like, I need to get it done, and they're under intense pressure, and I understand that. But the difficulty when you're trying to rush these things and you're not setting that solid foundation of the people bit is that you can rush to the end, but it will fail.
Yasmin, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. The very best. I wish you luck with Media Zoo, with all these companies that you go in and try and do very difficult things and come up with big successes. So congratulations again. And
Thank
the very
you. It's
best
been a
to you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
I have a new book out, Creating Joy at Work. 501 plus ideas for how to create happy workplaces. Check out how to give people trust, make them feel good, and enable freedom within guidelines. Also, how to select managers who are good at managing, and how to celebrate mistakes. There's a PDF at happy.co.uk, or you can check it out on Amazon.
Welcome back, Lisa Minogue-White. It's a long time since we've been on the same program together. It's a real pleasure to have you back and to listen to your first interview talking to our good friend, Michelle Parry-Slater.
Okay, well, hi, Michelle. And you have the honour of being our first author spotlight here on Learning Now TV. Would you like me to get Colin to send your certificate in the post?
Yeah, I'll frame it and put it behind me.
Fabulous. So I am delighted today to be discussing what's an essential read. And I think that's not just for L&D, but for anybody that wants to understand L&D. In fact, Michelle, little fun fact, I've actually got my team at work to read your book as well.
Oh, thank you.
Because I think it's crucial for anyone in the business to understand how L&D works and how you can maximize those relationships. And Michelle's done an incredible job in her book, The Learning and Development Handbook. It synthesizes a huge scope of practice and learning into really its fundamental elements. It's now in its second edition, so it builds on some huge thunderous themes of AI at the moment and L&D's place in this brave new world. And I can't wait to get stuck in with Michelle on this. So Michelle, welcome back to Learning Now TV.
Thank you. Thank you. It feels weird to be on this side of the camera, but yeah, it's lovely to be able to showcase the book. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome. So let's start at the beginning of the journey. What initially motivated you to write the original edition of the book, and then what prompted the second edition?
Well, I've always had kind of this life mission to just simply be useful to other people. And when I went self-employed back in 2014, feels like a million years ago, I was really grateful to so many people for helping me understand the world of learning and development and my place within it. So during 2015, I thought, I'm going to tweet every day. Do you remember when Twitter was a thing and we were all on Twitter? So I tweeted every day a tweet which I called No Plasters. And that was no Band-Aids for those people listening from overseas. The idea really that we are just sticking plasters over stuff in learning. We're not getting to the root of why things aren't working in businesses and what needs to change. We're just trotting out the course because we always have. So I wanted to just encourage people to think differently, to do a little bit differently, just to have the bravery to try something different. Even if it was just ask why when the sales guy says, Bob needs another sales course. So I did that for a whole year in 2015, and very kindly, Learning Now TV interviewed me about that process. And it was Colin. It was the producer of this lovely channel, Learning Now TV, that said, you should write that into a book. And of course, I was like, no way. Who am I? Who am I to do that? But it stewed within me. And I thought, well, that would be useful for people. What if I could write the book that I wished that I had when I started out? And so that's where it kind of started to stem from.
So, well, let's get into the meat of the book itself. And where I wanted to start was actually right at the beginning, because it's something that you mentioned in the preface, that we should appraise what we're doing now and consider how we can make it more impactful. So, Michelle, what questions would you encourage somebody to ask themselves to do that?
This is such an interesting sort of pickup in the book, because for those who haven't read it, the preface of the second edition was when I was asked to write a second edition, I was like, how can I possibly improve my baby? How can I possibly change anything? And
This is literary perfection.
and so I really thought, I've got nothing new to say. Everything's been said. And so I sat down and I questioned to myself, how are you so arrogant to think that the world hasn't moved on, that your work hasn't moved on? So in terms of what questions would I ask people to ask themselves, is the question that I ask myself. Be my own critical friend. Seek the feedback. Don't be so wedded to your own work that you stop being your own critical friend. And I think that this is where sometimes we can get stuck in L&D. We do a really great learning program, maybe a leadership program, maybe we win an award for it. And then we think, this is the rocks, we're going to sort of, everything's on this foundation. Everything we do is built like this. And it's why we have this mindset that a course works, so we do a course. But actually, a course might not work when you lift and shift to a new setting, that this course doesn't fly. Well, the reason it doesn't fly is because your context is different, because your people are different, because the day of the week is different. And so we shouldn't be wedded to our work. So I had a word with myself. I told myself off. I said, no, actually, what is the truth that I live in now? What has shifted? Because I wrote the book initially in 2019, 2020, before the pandemic really hit. It wasn't published until 2021 because of that furlough that the publishers had. But 2023, when I wrote the second edition, an entirely different world.
It's really interesting how sometimes the universe comes together in terms of the timing of these kinds of books, because I think having written the first edition during COVID and then the second edition post, I think not just for learning and development, but for so many different aspects of the world of work, it challenged what we felt was essential and that rock that you said, and actually what reality is, because some of those things were taken away through no choice of our own, but some of those norms were taken away. And it was quite a disorientating period of time, kind of a bit of an existential crisis for people in terms of what does it look like now. And I think you've done a very good job of kind of like reshaping and helping to put on the map again, no, this is what learning and development is. And in fact, if COVID taught us anything, it really did challenge that, no, this is what we are capable of, rather than the order takers or just producing courses. This is fundamentally what we can do. And it kind of leads me on to my next question. And you mentioned some of that in your last answer, actually, but what are some of the common misconceptions or misunderstandings of learning that you wanted to address in the book?
I think I'll start with what's a common misunderstanding about me, and then relay that back to your question. A lot of people think, oh, you're the digital girl. You're the girl that doesn't like in-person learning. There's not a chapter in the book that says face-to-face learning. There is a chapter that says social learning, and there's a chapter that says stakeholders. There's a chapter that says digital. And because I don't talk about that specifically, people think that I don't believe that to be true. However, it's absolutely not true. Page 177, I said earlier, I am going to read. This is the last time I'm going to read and indulge myself with page 177. The reason why it's important is in fact, it's page 176. I lied. Don't even know my own book. But what I believe to be true is absolutely this. And so from a misconceptions perspective, from people thinking the answer is a course or the answer is a podcast or the answer is an e-learning, this is what I encourage. This is not a two-sided coin of classroom or not classroom. Rather, it's a multifaceted dice. We must be advocates for the right solution, for the right problem, for the right people, at the right time, for the right reasons, delivered in the right way. And I truly, with all my heart, believe that to be true, that we must get out of this mindset of, well, live online, that's what we did in COVID. Everyone hated it. Well, they hated it because you lifted what you did face to face and you dumped it live online. They are different mediums. They are different design processes to get to good in those both settings. Similarly, click next e-learning, the conception that e-learning has to be like that, it doesn't.
Well, you've hit on probably my favorite discussion point when you talk about the problem piece, because I think if we elevate up, one of the common themes that you explore in the book, which is a real passion of mine, is the connection with business outcomes, strategy, and kind of guarding against the order taker syndrome. So, Michelle, how do L&D, and I think this has been a perennial question, raise their status and get the attention and the time that they need across the business?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I think it's fundamental. But the reality of my role, my being a practitioner, I always will take I call it my coalface job. So I always try and have periodically jobs in the real world, because when you're sort of a consultant talking about this stuff, people can then say, well, it's easy for you. You just fly in and out. You get brought in when there's a problem to solve, but I live in this daily and I have no voice. Or, I'm 7 rungs from the CEO. How am I supposed to get them to care about learning and development? And so that, I feel, makes me a better practitioner, because I live this reality and I do hear it. I do feel it. I do understand it is hard. So my advice here is start somewhere. I call it make better cake. And I describe this in the book because everyone likes cake. Everyone likes something good. Everyone likes when we have a win, whatever the win is. But what we tend to do in L&D is we don't shout about it. We don't showcase our wins. We might go for an award and the award might sit on our desk, but unless somebody comes by and goes, oh, what's that piece of glass for? We're not very good at really showcasing and shouting. We're not very good at kind of saying to the business, wow, this is the value that I add. And I think there's 2 challenges with that. One is because it's difficult to prove our value, because our value doesn't always stand in isolation. If people are in a learning program, then actually many things are happening for them. Their mindset is being opened. Their growth is not just simply them coming to our intervention, but it's the application of that back in the workplace. It's their manager support. It might be, I don't know, the economy is having a boom, so they make more sales, which makes them feel good about themselves. So the learning itself is hard to isolate as making the difference. But when you plug the learning into the bigger system, actually, that is part of your benefit. That's part of your value. So when we start to have the conversations earlier, when we mirror the language of the business, so we're not talking about how many people came to training. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about learning except us. So what we're talking about is the business problem that we have here is that we're losing customers to our competitor. Okay, well, how can I help with that? Why are we losing customers? Let's have that conversation. And when we start to mirror the language of the business, the problems of the business, it becomes much, much easier to show our contribution towards the success. So, let's hypothetically losing customers to our competitor. What does that look like? Do we have a strategy? Do we not have a strategy? What is the strategy? Is the strategy working? Now, these are conversations that you might think, as an L&D practitioner, how can I even have a conversation about strategy? How can I even influence business outcomes? So this is where you physically make better cake. Take the cookies round, go and chat to people, go and have coffee with people.
Michelle, what are some of the quick wins that you think from your book that a viewer or a listener could implement tomorrow based on kind of your overall view of the world of L&D?
I think the first thing, and I think what we don't do enough of, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to it, which is reflection. So just build in that reflection. Whatever program you're running right now, just carve out some time for those learners to spend some quality thinking time about the application back in the workplace, about what they've learned, about what's still missing for them. Because I don't think in work, especially post-pandemic work, we give ourselves enough time for quality thinking.
Fabulous. Well, Michelle, I knew it would be a pleasure. It has been a pleasure. We're definitely going to have you back. Like you said, I hope that third edition is not too far away, that you'll be working on that very, very soon. But Michelle, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, so open as you always are. And yeah, we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you.
Rob Hubbard continues his session on sustainability. This week, he's talking to Phil Hazel about sustainability in L&D. Well worth listening to Phil.
So I'm delighted to be speaking today to Phil Hazel, Portfolio Director of Executive Education at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership. And, it really would be wonderful, I think, if there were more leaders who thought more about sustainability. So it's wonderful to have you here today, Phil. So first of all, I'd just like to ask you, what are the typical challenges that you see that organisations face in moving to be more sustainable?
I think there are many. I think it sometimes feels as if there's a web of constraints. So externally, it can feel like all of the geopolitical turbulence that's happening at the moment, all of that dynamic regulatory environment, everything that's going on around the commercial imperative and the need to be future fit, is all very present, I think real and present for all businesses at the moment. And then I think alongside that, there's all of the internal constraints as well. There's the commercial pressure, obviously. There's the squeeze on budgets. There's all of the competing priorities that businesses are facing. And it always feels like there's no time, right? But I think that underneath all of that, there's a kind of set of fundamentals. There's a set of fundamental laws of nature, which will never change. And alongside those, a set of environmental, social, and economic crises, which are all interconnected. And together, they necessitate this paradigm shift for business. So regardless of what's happening in terms of the external turbulence and the internal challenge, all of those fundamental issues will always hold true. And that necessitates by business this real transformative change, a real paradigm shift from what's happening at the moment and business trying to be a little less bad. And I think there's a perception sometimes that those two sets of ideas are in tension, but I would say that they're not, and that action on sustainability can very frequently address business problems, help solve them, also drive business benefit, and very often also lead to competitive advantage.
Yeah, very good. I mean, as tough as it is for businesses out there, it does feel, and I see this as well, it does feel like organisations are getting pushed in the right direction for hard reasons, for often bad reasons, but you're right, there's so many benefits to it. So my next question, Phil, can you describe some of the tools and approaches that L&D teams could take to aid with the transition to sustainability?
I think it's a great question. And I think that first thing to say is the role of L&D professionals and as a community as a whole is really important. I think it's key to the transition. And I think I say that because the effective sustainability paradigm shift really depends on shifts in knowledge and in skills and in attitudes. And it's really a combination of all three. It's that head, hands, heart. And I think L&D teams can really be central for that because they are the ones who have that really deep, rich experience of how to affect that kind of shift in all of those dimensions. And I think if there's one skill that I'd really point to that feels necessary for business leaders and wider organizations at the moment, it's definitely systems thinking. So what that tells me is that L&D teams have really a very important and very central role to play, that they are fundamental to those shifts in knowledge, skills and attitudes, and that maybe there's an opportunity for them to reflect on existing tools and approaches that they use, but really take a sustainability perspective on that. So there might be, for example, a stakeholder matrix or a level of kind of mapping themselves and their organization within wider systems, or even perhaps a theory of change approach, which might already be happening, but reflecting on all of those things from a sustainability perspective, considering what the stakeholder map looks like if you view it through the lens of sustainability, for me, takes the thinking and the tools and the approaches to a different level and really helps them be effective in that context.
Yeah, I think that's a really empowering point, that for these L&D teams, there will be some new tools to add, I'm sure, but for a large part, they're going to be using things that they're already familiar with. But as you say, using them, looking at them through a different lens. So already, you've not got this huge learning curve, you're already on that journey. I love that idea. One of the things that we see is quite often sustainability teams are quite small within organizations. Sometimes in large or even large organizations, it's like one person or 2 or 3 people. The budgets are fairly restrained. How do you see the responsibility for sustainability within organizations changing over time, or do you see it staying the same?
I definitely see it changing. And I think there has been this perception that sustainability is one team or one function's role. And as you said, the weight of that on a small team has been very hard, I think, to really work with. It's too big to be one team's work. It has to be that the ownership of sustainability action is distributed, and that mindset for sustainability is embedded, and that has to happen in everyone's role. So ultimately, this is everyone's thing. There's a set of skills associated with sustainability, and again, I call out systems thinking as being a really key one of those. And for me, the questions that everyone needs to ask across every business are: what does sustainability mean for me, for my role, for my team, for my business, and all of its characteristic elements of its characteristics. But then also, how can action on sustainability really support solving business problems? So action on, for example, sustainability that will drive then cost reduction, or which will prepare for regulation that's coming down the pipe, or which will help solve a design problem. There's a kind of complementarity there where sustainability action can really drive business benefit. And I think this kind of transition of ownership from those L&D teams to this kind of very wide and distributed understanding that it's everyone's part of everyone's role, it's already underway, and that's quite exciting. And I think it's ultimately going to lead to really strong value creation. So in terms of retention benefits, in terms of having a really resilient workforce, but also in having a future fit business.
And attracting and retaining the right talent. When sustainability is part of everybody's role, we know how important purpose is to well, not everybody, but many people working. It's going to help attract those kinds of people. How do you see that change from sustainability being kind of the concentrated responsibility of a small team? And you can imagine for an L&D team, that makes it relatively easy. It's like, right, I'll go and be great friends with our sustainability colleagues and work really closely with them. Moving from that to this kind of distributed model, how does that change practically the kinds of things that L&D teams would need to do to support that?
I think what we've been seeing is exactly what you described. So we've been seeing a move from typically working with sustainability teams to beginning to see sustainability and L&D teams partnering together, which I guess is the second stage, and then moving through to that third stage that you described when it's about embedding it in everyone's role and everyone's responsibility. So I think in terms of that initial shift from sustainability to sustainability L&D teams partnering, there's something really exciting, I think, about unlocks. Typically, sustainability teams, at least the ones that we work with, have incredibly deep technical knowledge. So they are real experts on decarbonisation, on nature regeneration, on social justice through the supply chain. They have lots of very deep expertise in those areas, and they're often organising sustainability education programs around those, but usually they're not education experts. So it's rare for me anyway to come across someone who's a sustainability and L&D expert in the same role. So I think partnering between those two teams really unlocks a kind of complementary set of experience and skill sets, which is incredibly powerful. It's the L&D team really working with the sustainability colleagues to make that learning engaging, to make it personal, to make it effective, to make it sticky, and to really help to unlock and embed that knowledge and that mindset shift. And I think there's a kind of perception that, that can be done in siloed teams, but actually partnering is much more effective, is what we find. And then that transition onwards then to it being part of everyone's role is really, I think it's enabled by that program of sustainability education and that learning, which then enables people coming out of those programs of education to be feeling that sense of responsibility and ownership and feeling that quite deeply within their own role. I mean, I think what we're seeing quite recently is a challenge for L&D teams, and this is also felt in the sustainability community, this kind of grappling with how to understand sustainability and AI in relation to one another. And I think there can be a perception that it's a choice between, it's a focus on one or the other. But I think what I would always encourage is the understanding of, one as an enabler of the other, or thinking of the two dimensions as being deeply interconnected and taking that approach.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, there's some really wonderful practical steps that anyone in L&D can take, really, there to be more involved in the sustainability initiatives in their organisation, and then to move to that third stage of where it's much more distributed, more people are working upon it across and within the business. Phil Hazel, it's been wonderful speaking to you today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Rob.
Next is learning news with our friend Rob Clark. Rob is talking to no less an eminence, Grease or otherwise, Donald Taylor. And he's also speaking to two of his keynoters at this year's Learning Technology Conference, none other than David Kelly and Danny Johnson. Fascinating discussions by all.
Will learning and development get bypassed by AI? We put this question to Learning Technologies Conference Chair Donald Taylor, and asked Danny Johnson and Dave Kelly, who provided the opening keynote, about their message for the conference. Mind Tools has bought Kineo from City and Guilds. Its CEO Shabnam Shahani is here. Learning news is at Learning Technologies, and I've got Danny Johnson and Dave Kelly with me, who opened the conference this year. Danny and Dave, thank you for joining me. Sum up Learning Technology in 2025, the big trends, and what was your message for the conference this year?
I think a lot of it is understanding where our role is going, getting an idea of understanding your own work environment, your own culture, and how that's evolving, because it is changing. And if you're not paying attention to that and understanding how it's changing, not only within the industry, but also within the culture of your own organization, you're going to be left behind.
I think the other thing for L&D to keep in mind is that we have been on the side of the organization for a really long time. We've been sort of an auxiliary part of the organization. The way that we're seeing technology move and the needs that we see that the organization have, we have to integrate in with the rest of the organization, our data, our technology, the way that we think, the problems we solve. As we get a good idea of what skills are that people have in the organization, and as we understand what AI can do, then we have to redesign the entire work systems. And so we're not just talking about meshing with other people functions, we're talking about meshing with IT and meshing with operations and meshing with organizational design. All of these things are going to have to be rethought because of what's happening right now in the tech space. Is
L&D in danger of being bypassed by AI?
Absolutely. Not in everything, but there are great things you can do with AI that L&D is not necessarily seizing hold of. L&D won't become history overnight. There's always a role for it, but that role may be reduced to compliance and mandatory training, while the rest of the organisation does exciting new things about knowledge sharing with AI.
And I would add, I think, to your question of are we going to get there? Some of us will. And I hate to say it that way, but some of us won't, because the reality is things are changing. And it's changing in a way, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, that the the data that's there, all the stuff, we're going to be able to do things that we've never been able before. We're also going to be accountable in ways we've never been able to be before. Showing the impact, showing the correlation. We're going to have that ability, which comes with the accountability for that. And that's going to make some people uncomfortable. But that's a good place to be, I think, a good place of discomfort to be in, because it's going to add up to our impact.
Two well-known workplace learning brands are coming together. The management and leadership development company MindTools has acquired the digital learning consultancy Kineo, which was owned by City and Guilds. What's behind the acquisition? How do these businesses complement each other? And what's the plan? Shabnam Shahani is MindTools CEO and joins me on Learning News today. Shabnam, thanks for coming on. Why the acquisition of Kineo and why now?
Morning, Rob. Thank you for having me here. So there were two key drivers for this acquisition. Firstly, the acquisition helps accelerate MindTools' growth strategy, which focuses on new products and new revenue streams. Secondly, as you're aware, the L&D space is incredibly fast-moving. It's being reshaped by technology, by data, and very fast-changing learner expectations. To keep up, companies need scale, they need to be agile, and have a very strong focus on innovation and on enhancing learning outcomes. This acquisition is a major step to expand our global reach and to offer complete and complementary learning solutions. Together, MindTools and Kineo can respond to a far broader range of customer needs, from self-paced learning solutions and off-the-shelf content to custom design, platforms, consultancy, and analytics, all underpinned by real insight and research into what drives learner engagement and workplace performance. This is a great opportunity for both businesses and for our people. It will enable us to grow internationally as well as remain at the forefront of innovation in learning and development.
And that's Learning News this June. A big thank you to our programme sponsor, CLO 100, which is about to run its first Learning Leaders Summer Forum next month in Windsor. Laura Overton and Nick Shackleton-Jones are providing the keynotes, and it's looking like a fabulous event if you're able to spare 2 days this July. Thank you to all of my guests today, and thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Back to Kate and Nigel.
I have the privilege, and a real privilege, of giving the first interview on Laurie Niles Hoffman's new book. So that is an honour, and thank you for agreeing to talk to me today, Laurie.
I wouldn't have it any other way, Nigel. Thank you so much.
Now, Laurie is an independent consultant focusing on EdTech strategy and on learning ecosystems. More about all of that stuff in the book. So let's just dig straight in and ask you, what made you decide to write this book? Was it a long gestation? And
this has been percolating probably over the course of about 10 or 12 years, really. It's because it started with I've done a lot of what we would call LMS implementation back in the day, right? On large scale global LMS implementations. And I found that there started to be a pattern, especially as I came in as a consultant, started to see the same things over and over again. And I found that there wasn't a playbook that kind of guided you on the things that you needed to think about. I was also seeing some of the same things tripping up different clients, and it didn't seem that anybody was really talking about them. Now, every transformation is different and is unique to the company, but there are some things I really believe that you do need to have set before you start embarking on this type of change. So yeah, it took quite a long time, and then really it wasn't until I guess sort of mid last year where I sat down and said, okay, right, I'm actually going to put fingers to keyboard and make it happen.
Yeah. So there are 8 levers. I'm not going to go through them individually, but essentially the book is structured around those 8 levers. And there's a bit at the beginning and a bit at the end, but essentially the book is the 8 levers. Why 8?
Well, I'll tell you a little story. The number wasn't anything auspicious that I picked, but I'd actually written the first draft of it, and I sent it to my lovely husband, and he took a look at it, and his first bit of feedback was, there are 8 levers, not 9, because the original title was The 9 Levers of Tech Transformation. And I looked at him like he had 3 heads, and I thought, oh, really? And I went back, I'm like, no, went through there, and yeah, sure enough, counted again, and there were 8. So the 8 wasn't anything by plan, and it should have been 9. And if anyone's interested, I do own the 9levers.com if you're interested in buying that domain, because I didn't need that anymore. But I tried to keep it also too that it wasn't too unwieldy, but also respectful of the fact that a transformation is not going to be 3 easy steps. It's not going to be a small number of things. It is broad enough that is a lot to think about. That's just the reality of it.
What do you want people to come away with? Well, first of all, how are they going to approach this book? Do you want them to kind of dip in and go, oh, I'm really interested in learning ecosystem, I'm really interested in this element of it, and work through that? Or do you want them to sit back, read the whole book, and then go back through it again? How do you see it interacting with its reader?
So really good question. I see it as something that, yes, you want to read the whole thing, but you're not gonna act on the whole thing all at once. It's simply way too deep on and work that you need to do on each. But what I wanted people to do is, before they rush out and buy new tech or think about, I need new tech, which is usually where people start. And to me, it's like that's buying the race car. Okay, so hold on. Before you do that, read through and just get a feel for, like, how prepared are you as an organization? How prepared is your team? Have you thought of any of these things before? Do you see any barriers? And do some of that groundwork, and then, when you're ready then to look at your ed tech, that's when you'll probably go deeper into some of the exercises and examples throughout the book to help you think through some of those issues. Because I find that also, when I come into transformations, there's two ways that I'm brought into an organization. One is they bought new tech and nobody's using it, so they're like, "Oh, okay, we got to bring somebody in to help us with that."
That cost us $1.5 million.
Exactly. It's like, oh, okay, so that's not the ideal. Or when they want to do an RFP for tech. And what I wanted to be able to do is to say, before you do that request, have a look through the book and think of where you are, because that's also going to inform too what you even put in your RFP, and you're going to think very, very differently about it. So that's how I hope people approach the book.
Yeah, I think that's very wise advice. And it's you can go into ChatGPT and say, I need an RFP for this tech, and it will give you one. But that's not it. That's got nothing whatsoever to do with the organization, and it's dangerous when you think that RFP is generic. It's got nothing to do particularly with your organization. And there are wise words, I think. I tell you what I also love, the very short case studies that you drop in all the way through. They're very practical, they're simple, and they don't go on for 26 pages. They're just a kind of snapshot of, think about this person, think about this circumstance, and you learn a lot, I think, from those. But what do you want people to take away?
I see it as a continuous role. I think because there are some things that, depending on where you are in the journey, you're going to read parts of it and go, well, that doesn't apply to me now, or I won't need that. And then, well, yeah, you will. You may find 6 months after launch, that content strategy piece comes back, or something like that will happen. So I'm hoping that it's also something that people can refer back to again and again. I also really see this as a piece, and some of the earlier drafts, and because this was also in some different disparate pieces. You'll see pieces of this in my work. A lot of times this is also pieces that you can give up to stakeholders to have a look at, and to say, like, there is actually a plan in how we do this and why we do this. It's not something that we're just blindly following. We didn't ask ChatGPT for this. And so hopefully it has some longevity. That said, I do say in the book, this will probably be lining the bottom of bird cages by 2028. And I know that because tech is changing so quickly, and the way that we work and function with AI is changing so quickly. So how long this book actually lasts, I hope is not indicative of my prowess or my capabilities. But I also am just being realistic that things are changing so quickly. So how long it lasts, that I don't know, but I do hope it's something that lays a foundation for people to keep coming back to.
But the nicest and most prosaic way of describing a book that has gone past its use-by date is to line bird cages. Now, a lot of other people have used much less prosaic language and much more basic language. So I think it's quite a nice future to line a bird cage, particularly if they're very pretty and lovely birds. It's a great honor to do a second stage of life with birds.
Waste not, want not, reduce,
Waste not,
reuse,
want not.
recycle.
Indeed. You actually tell a story about yourself. I wonder if you could just tell us about that, when you got chewed up, and the reason why you got chewed up was that not that you'd done anything wrong, but you hadn't told people what you were planning to do.
Yeah, so this was an interesting one. So I was working at a company. It was very high paced. It was a SaaS company, and we were doing rollouts every 8 weeks, and we had to keep the training up to date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I inherited a team from a person who was no longer there, who said yes to everything. And when I brought in, I looked at everything and saw the team. They were burnt out. It was just insane, and we just were not keeping pace. So I implemented a triage model to really look at all the things and how they were important based on what we were trying to do as an organization. I did inform, my VP was said, okay, we're going to cut this from this. We're going to focus on that. And we're just not going to treat everything, as an emergency, but we're going to be very deliberate because we simply can't. And that worked, and we were doing really, really well. And then there was an all-hands meeting, and the CRO stepped up and said, why isn't L&D pulling their weight? Because I've been waiting for this course for I don't know how many months. And this was in front of the entire company. And it was mortifying, and I was angry because I thought we've been working so hard and we have been rethinking strategically on what needs to be done. And we were keeping clients happy. That was the other thing I think that annoyed me, is that this was client-facing customer education. So we were putting the focus on them as opposed to internally, because that was where revenue was coming from. And also, too, is where we only had capacity. We were very underfunded. And I hated this man. I was so mad. And I had a conversation with him, and I explained, these are all the things that we're doing. And this is why we were focusing on customer first. And this is how constrained we were. And this is why his course moved to the back. And he said, why didn't you just tell me that? And I had been so head down worrying about process and strategy. And I felt that telling my VP was enough. And he's like, well, I totally get that. I wouldn't have made that comment. I totally understand why this wasn't a priority, and I would have made the same decision. And my comment to him was like, you jerk. Did you have to rake me on over the coals in front of everybody? But it was an important thing, like communicate, over communicate. Do not leave any stone unturned, because when you don't do that, people will not understand what you're doing, especially on a large transformation like this, where they're not seeing all of the moving parts. So this is important.
I think that, to me, that sums up the book in a way. That on the one hand, there's lots of technical stuff. So if you're going to do an RFP, bringing in a new piece of technology, this book is very helpful. It will say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What are you trying to do? All of those things. But on the other hand, it says, hey, whatever you're doing, just do remember to tell people. So, and it's the two things together which create the impact. If you produce a beautiful RFP and you haven't told the right people, you are lost. If you tell the right people, but what you're doing is ill thought through, you are lost. So the book meets somewhere in the middle, and that makes it extremely practical and useful. And you can take from it what you will. There's one little hint right at the very end. It says, just remember to make friends with your IT people. And that was a lesson I had to learn, and I learned it well. And it was the best thing I ever did, was make friends with IT, because they are your friends and can be your friends. If you treat them as a battleground where you try and go around them, you will end up in big trouble. But it's you've been there, seen it, done it. It's your life distilled in a way, both your life when you were working in corporate and your life since as a consultant. Good luck, Laurie. I hope it's a great success. And thank you for your time. I appreciate the chance to talk to you and to be the first.
Thank you so much, Nigel. I would not have had it any other way. It is a complete honor.
Well, that's another month away, gone to bed, and looking forward to the next month. What I loved about this show was there was a theme uniting all the speakers. And that's rare that we managed to get that continuity. I'm not sure that's by design, but it is by trend and by evidence. And that theme is that if you really want to make an impact in L&D, you're dealing with the whole organization. So everyone has had this holistic approach, looking at business needs, changing the whole business, focusing on taking people with you, not doing things to people. And I think that is quite important. So if you just contrast what Yasmin Alani is saying about changing culture with what Danny Minogue is saying about the prevailing trends in organizations, and you will understand that there's something pretty fundamental going on. And I think you should take note of it. I certainly have. Guess what? There are a few events up and coming, and we cover the world this time, starting in no other place than Australia. And we're talking about the Queensland coast near Brisbane, where the Learning Impact Summit 2025, hosted by the Learning and Development Association of Australia, that's taking place Gold Coast, 4th and 5th of September. Learning Live 2025, back in London, back on the 17th and 18th of September, back with the LPI. Enjoy that. And then 2 American events running simultaneously and both linked. First is Learning 2025 in Orlando in Florida on the 1st and 3rd of October, and exactly at the same time, the Learning Leaders Conference, hosted by the Learning Guild. Finally, we've got the World of Learning back in Birmingham and at the Conference and Expo Centre on the 7th and 8th of October. I hope you travel the world and visit every single one of those conferences. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with you, talking to you, introducing the program this month. And we'll be back in July, and it will be the very end of July. So see you on the 31st of July, 2025. Thanks for watching.